The Boston drizzle had a way of seeping into your bones, a persistent chill that no amount of coffee could fully ward off. Dr. Eris Thorne felt it as he stepped out of his car, the gray sky pressing down on the sprawling construction site. Mud squelched under his boots, a thick, greedy sound that mirrored the feeling in his gut. Another one. Yellow police tape, stark against the brown earth, cordoned off a section of the pit where a new luxury condo was meant to rise. Instead, they'd unearthed the past. Detective Harding, a man whose weary expression seemed permanently etched onto his face, met him by the tape. "Doc, thanks for coming out on a Saturday." "The dead don't keep a calendar, Harding," Eris replied, his voice low and steady. He pulled on a pair of latex gloves, the snap echoing in the damp air. "What have we got?" Excavator operator felt a crunch that wasn't rock or old pipe. "We got a single set of remains in a shallow, unmarked grave. Looks old. Your territory, not mine. My guys are just here to make sure it stays your territory." Harding gestured toward the pit with a thumb. "My forensic team is waiting for your lead." Eris nodded and ducked under the tape. In the center of the cordoned-off area, a figure was already hunched over the site. Lena, his brightest and most dedicated graduate student, was meticulously brushing away soil with the patience of a saint. She looked up as he approached, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice a respectful whisper. "Initial assessment suggests a female, late teens or early 20s. The pelvic inlet is wide, subpubic angle is broad. No obvious signs of perimortem trauma from what I can see so far, but she's still partially articulated." "Good work, Lena." Eris knelt beside her, the cold mud soaking through the knee of his trousers. He surveyed the scene with an expert eye. The skeleton lay on its side in a fetal position, the bones stained a deep umber from the mineral-rich soil. It was a posture of finality, but whether of peace or of fear, the bones alone wouldn't say. His job was to give them a voice. For the next 3 hours, they worked in near silence, a silent ballet of brushes, dental picks, and trowels. The city hummed around them, the distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic on the nearby interstate, but in their small square of earth, time had stopped. Eris mapped the position of each bone, his fingers tracing the delicate lines of the clavicle, the sturdy curve of the femur. Every skeleton was a novel waiting to be translated, a life story told in calcium and decay. He estimated the burial was old, likely early 20th century, based on the soil stratigraphy and the complete lack of modern dental work or synthetic materials. It was probably a forgotten family plot or a potter's field, paved over by progress. A sad but not uncommon story in a city as old as Boston. It was a historical case, an archaeological puzzle, until it wasn't. It was Lena who found it. Her brush, sweeping away the last layer of soil from the skeleton's torso, hit something that wasn't bone. It made a dull, metallic clink. "Doctor," she breathed, freezing in place. "There's something here." Eris leaned in closer. Tucked within the arc of the ribcage, resting against the vertebrae as if clutched to the person's chest in their last moments, was a small, dark object. It was rectangular, its edges softened by corrosion. He carefully worked a pick around it, loosening the compacted earth. It was a box. A small, tin lockbox, the kind someone might use for letters or keepsakes. It was heavily rusted, but remarkably, it seemed intact. "Harding," Eris called out, his voice sharp with an urgency that broke the spell of the sight. The detective ambled over, peering down. "What is it? A lunchbox?" "I think it's a strong box." "A document box," Eris said, his heart rate quickening. This changed things. A formal burial wouldn't typically include a locked box clutched to the chest. This felt personal, secretive. It's nestled right in the thoracic cavity, almost as if she was protecting it. Harding grunted. "Can you get it open?" "Not here," Eris said firmly. "Any attempt to force it could destroy whatever's inside. The contents, if any survive, will be incredibly fragile. We need to take this back to the lab. The whole thing." He looked at Lena, who was staring at the box with wide, unblinking eyes. "We'll transport the remains and the box together, exactly as they are. Let's get the block lift prepared. As they worked to encase the section of earth in plaster and burlap for transport, Eris couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer just excavating a forgotten grave. The tin box, silent and sealed, had transformed the scene. It was no longer just a collection of bones. It was a time capsule. A mystery box, held tight for nearly a century, waiting for someone to finally read its contents. The air in the lab was a stark contrast to the gritty chaos of the construction site. Here, everything was controlled. The humidity was stable, the light was a sterile, even white, and the only sound was the low hum of the ventilation system. The tin box sat in the center of a stainless steel table, a relic of a forgotten time looking alien under the modern examination lamps. Eris and Lena stood over it, clad in lab coats and nitrile gloves, their faces reflecting a mixture of clinical focus and palpable anticipation. "All right, Lena, let's see what secrets she wanted to keep," Eris said, his voice low and steady. He motioned toward a tray of delicate instruments that looked more suited for a surgeon than an anthropologist. Dental picks, fine-bristled brushes, and small vials of chemical solvents. Lena nodded, her eyes fixed on the box. "The corrosion is extensive, especially around the seam. If we apply too much pressure, the whole thing could collapse." "Precisely," Eris agreed. "Patience is our primary tool here." He carefully selected a fine-tipped pick and began to gently scrape away the compacted dirt and rust from the lid's edge. The process was agonizingly slow. Flakes of rust fell away like desiccated blood, revealing the dull gray of the underlying tin. For over an hour, they worked in near silence, communicating only with brief, specific instructions. Finally, Eris found a slight give. "There's a hinge," he murmured, pointing with the pick, "still partially intact." He switched to a weaker solvent, applying it drop by drop with a pipette along the seam. The chemical fizzed softly, dissolving the stubborn rust that had sealed the box shut for a century. The tension in the room thickened. This was the moment of truth. With a delicate prying tool, Eris applied the slightest upward pressure. A faint groan of stressed metal broke the silence, followed by a soft click as the seal finally gave way. He lifted the lid. Both he and Lena leaned in, holding their breath. Inside, nestled in what seemed to be a bed of dry, brittle fabric, was a small, leather-bound book. It was miraculously preserved, the dark brown leather showing only minor cracking at the spine. The tin box had acted as a time capsule, protecting its contents from the moisture and soil that had claimed the body around it. Lena let out a slow, quiet exhale. "A diary," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "Eris, it's a diary." Eris nodded, his own expression one of profound reverence. He carefully lifted the diary from the box. It was light, fragile. On the cover, embossed in faded gold leaf, was a single, elegant initial, E. He placed it carefully on a clean velvet cloth. "Let's see if she'll tell us her name," he said. With the utmost care, using a pair of flat, soft-tipped tweezers, he opened the cover. The inside page was yellowed with age, but the ink, a dark sepia, was remarkably clear. Written in a looping, graceful cursive were the words, "This diary belongs to Alara Vance. October 3rd, 1923, Alara Vance," Lena read aloud. The name hung in the air, giving a voice to the silent bones they had so carefully unearthed. Eris turned the page to the first entry. The script was the same, but it was tighter, more hurried than the elegant signature on the flyleaf. It was as if it had been written under duress. He began to read aloud, his voice giving life to the words that had been silent for 100 years. October 5th, 1923. He knows, I am certain of it now. I see him everywhere. A shadow in the alley behind the bakery, a figure in the fog by the harbor, a new face in the crowd that watches me too long. It is not my imagination. The whispers I dismissed as the wind now sound like my name. The note I found tucked into my coat pocket wasn't a mistake. It held only one word, quiet. How could they know? I told no one. I wrote nothing of it down until this very moment, in this book that I pray no one ever finds. I bought it today, and this little tin box, hoping that if I bury the words deep enough, the secret might be safe. But I fear it is too late. The lock on my door feels flimsy, and the city lights no longer feel warm, but like 1,000 accusing eyes. I do not know who to trust. I am alone in this, and I am so terribly afraid. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Lena stared at the diary, her face pale. "My God, Eris," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't a record of a life. It's a record of fear. She wasn't just some unfortunate soul who succumbed to illness or accident." Eris closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the words settling upon him. The bones on the other table were no longer just a historical specimen. They were Alara Vance, and she had been terrified. "No," he said, opening his eyes and looking at Lena with a new, grim intensity. "She was being hunted, and we might be the only ones who can find out why." The air in the lab was thick with anticipation. The single page they had read hung between them, a ghostly whisper from a century ago. Eris, ever the methodical scientist, took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and leather filling his lungs. He gestured for Lena to continue. With hands that were surprisingly steady, she carefully turned the brittle page. The next few entries, spanning the following week of October 1923, painted a picture of Alara's life that stood in stark contrast to her initial terrified entry. October 17, 1923, the chill is truly in the air now. The leaves in the public garden are a riot of crimson and gold. I walked with Liam this afternoon, his hand warm in mine. He bought me a bag of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor, and their warmth seeped through my gloves. He makes me forget the shadows, at least for a little while. He spoke of his work at the docks, the ships coming in from all over the world. He dreams of seeing those places one day. I told him I'd go with him. He just smiled that slow, wonderful smile of his and squeezed my hand. "Liam," Lena murmured, looking up at Eris. "So that's his name. She sounds happy with him." "She does," Eris agreed, his eyes scanning the delicate script. "But notice the phrasing. He makes me forget the shadows, at least for a little while. The fear is still there, just beneath the surface." They read on. Alara's world came to life. She wrote of her job mending fine fabrics at a dressmaker's shop in the Back Bay, the constant chatter of the other girls, the smell of steam and starched linen. She described her small room in a North End boarding house, the view from her window overlooking a bustling street filled with pushcarts and the cries of vendors. These entries were mundane, filled with the simple textures of a young woman's life. Yet, woven throughout was an undercurrent of anxiety that pricked at the edges of her happiness. October 22, 1923, a man was standing across the street from the shop again today. The same one. Tall in a dark wool coat and a fedora pulled low. He doesn't look at the shop window, he looks at me. When my eyes met his, he didn't look away. He just stared. My hands trembled so much I almost pricked my finger with the needle. Mrs. Gable asked if I was feeling unwell. I lied and said it was just a chill. Liam says I'm imagining things, that it's a big city. But this feels different. This feels personal. "Okay, this is getting more specific," Lena said, her voice a low hum of concentration. "A tall man in a dark coat. It's a generic description, but it's more than we had." Eris nodded, his mind already working. "It establishes a pattern. She's being overtly watched. The question is why?" They turned another page. The ink here was slightly smeared, as if a tear had fallen onto the paper while it was still wet. The date was October 25th. October 25, 1923, Liam was supposed to meet me after work. He never came. I waited for an hour on the corner, the gaslights hissing to life around me, turning the evening fog a sickly yellow. Every passing shadow made my heart leap into my throat. I finally walked home, my feet feeling like lead. I can't help but think it's because of me. Because of what I saw, I never should have gone to the warehouse that night. I was only bringing Liam his forgotten lunch pail, a simple kindness. But the door was ajar, and I heard voices, angry voices. I heard Mr. Finnegan's name. And another, the Trident. They mentioned the Trident shipment. I should have turned and run, but I froze. I saw them. The man in the dark coat was there with two others. They were looking at a ledger. I think they saw me in the shadows before I slipped away. Now Liam is gone. Oh God, what have I done? The lab, with its sterile white surfaces and the faint, clean scent of antiseptic, felt like a sealed world. But the leads from Alara's diary, Finnegan, the trident, were keys to the world outside, a world that existed a century ago. The next morning, Eris and Lena left the university behind, trading the controlled environment of the lab for the hushed, dusty halls of the Boston City Archives. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper and leather binding, a fragrance Eris found comforting. Rows of towering shelves disappeared into the dim light, holding the city's official memory in heavy, bound ledgers and countless boxes of records. Lena looked around, a little overwhelmed. "Where do we even start?" she whispered, her voice absorbed by the silence. "Systematically," Eris replied, his tone low but confident. He had spent a significant part of his career in places like this. "You take the shipping manifests and port authority logs from October and November 1923. Look for anything named the Trident. It could be a ship, a company, a code name, anything that stands out. I'll start with the business registries and police blotters. We're looking for Finnegan." They settled at a long oak table under the green glow of a banker's lamp. The work was painstaking. For Lena, it meant scrolling through endless reels of microfilm, the whirring of the machine a hypnotic drone. Page after page of cursive script listed incoming and outgoing vessels, their cargo meticulously itemized. Tons of coal, crates of textiles, barrels of fish. The names blurred together: the Sea Serpent, the Pride of Galway, the Morning Star. There were dozens of Finnegans in the city directories, but Eris methodically cross-referenced them with business licenses, looking for a connection to the docks or warehouse districts of the North End. Hours bled into one another. The initial excitement waned, replaced by a dull, methodical ache. Lena rubbed her eyes, feeling the strain from the glowing screen. "Anything?" she asked, breaking the silence. Eris shook his head, a line of frustration creasing his brow. "A lot of Finnegans. A fishmonger, two publicans, a tailor, none with registered businesses near the waterfront. It's like looking for one specific grain of sand on the beach." He gestured to a stack of police ledgers. "And the blotters are no better. Drunkenness, petty theft, a few brawls. Nothing that screams conspiracy." Lena sighed, turning back to her microfilm reader. She felt a pang of disappointment. In the lab, Alara's story felt so vivid, so immediate. Here, buried under a mountain of mundane history, it felt distant, almost imaginary. Was it possible they were wrong? That Alara's fear was just paranoia, a tragic misunderstanding? She was about to give up for the day when her finger paused on the screen. It was a manifest from the Port of Boston, dated November 4th, 1923. The script was tight, almost spidery, but the name was unmistakable. Vessel name, the Trident. "Eris," she said, her voice sharp with adrenaline, "I've got it." He was at her side in an instant, leaning over the reader. There it was. The Trident. Its listed cargo was innocuous: industrial machinery and parts. Its port of origin was Liverpool, England. But the date, it was just 2 days after Alara's last, frantic entry. "Good work, Lena," Eris said, his voice charged with renewed energy. "This is it. This is our anchor point." With a specific date and a ship's name, their search became surgical. Eris abandoned the business directories and pulled the newspaper archives for the first week of November 1923. While Lena printed a copy of the manifest, he began scrolling through the digital scans of the Boston Globe. He didn't find a headline. There was no major story about a criminal enterprise being exposed or a ship being seized. He felt a familiar flicker of doubt. Then he saw it, tucked away in the back pages. A small column, no more than 3 inches long, under the heading Local Briefs. Fire at North End, Warehouse, Boston. MA fire crews responded to a minor blaze late Tuesday evening at a waterfront warehouse on Commercial Street. The fire was quickly contained, with minimal damage to the structure. The warehouse, owned by local importer Mr. Patrick Finnegan, was reportedly empty at the time of the incident. Officials are investigating the cause, though preliminary reports suggest faulty electrical wiring. In a possibly related matter, authorities are seeking information on a dock worker who failed to report for his shift and has not been seen since Tuesday morning. Eris read it twice, then a third time. Every word sent a chill down his spine. The date, the location, the name. "Lena," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Come here." He pointed to the screen. She read the article, her eyes widening. Patrick Finnegan. A fire to destroy evidence, the ledger Alara mentioned. And the missing dock worker, Liam. The dusty silence of the archive suddenly felt heavy, charged with the weight of a century-old crime. The faded print on the screen was no longer just a historical record. It was an echo of Alara's terror, a confirmation of her worst fears. They hadn't just found a name, they had found her monster. The small, grainy newspaper text on the microfilm reader seemed to hum with a century of silence, finally broken. Patrick Finnegan. The name was no longer a ghost whispered from Alara's diary. It was a concrete fact, etched in public record. For a long moment, neither Eris nor Lena spoke. The quiet whir of the archive's ventilation system was the only sound. The discovery hadn't brought triumph, but a heavy, sobering certainty. Alara's fear had been real. The man she saw at the warehouse was not just a figment of her paranoia, he was the owner. "So Liam wasn't just a missing dock worker," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was an inconvenient witness, just like Alara." Eris nodded, his eyes still fixed on the screen. And Finnegan was willing to burn down his own warehouse to cover his tracks. This wasn't just about a ledger. This was organized. We need to build a profile, find out everything we can about this man. The hunt shifted. It was no longer a search for a single name, but an effort to resurrect a man's life from paper and ink. They divided the task. Eris, with his methodical patience, would tackle the bureaucratic paper trail, business registries, property deeds, tax records. Lena, whose intuition had served them well, would look for the human element. Census data, voter rolls, and any other mention of Finnegan in the city's social fabric. Hours bled into one another. The world outside the archives faded, replaced by the scent of aging paper and the rhythmic turning of pages. Eris was the first to strike gold. In the city's business registry, he found Finnegan Imports. On paper, it was a perfectly legitimate enterprise, specializing in textiles and small manufactured goods from Ireland and Britain. The books were immaculate, almost too much so. But it was the property deeds that painted a fuller picture. Finnegan owned not only the waterfront warehouse, but also a handsome three-story brownstone in Beacon Hill, an enclave of Boston's elite, miles from the grime of the docks. He wasn't just a Docklands boss, Eris murmured, rubbing his tired eyes as he laid out copies of the deeds on their table. He was living a double life, a respectable merchant in a wealthy neighborhood and a criminal operator by the sea. Meanwhile, Lena was hitting a wall. The census data gave them a basic sketch. Patrick Finnegan, born 1885 in County Cork, Ireland, immigrated 1905, naturalized citizen. But it offered no personality, no soul. She moved to newspaper archives, looking for social mentions. It felt like a long shot, but she remembered Alara's description. He carries himself with an air of importance. That kind of man, Lena reasoned, might seek public recognition. Her hunch paid off. Tucked away in a 1922 Society column about a hospital charity gala was a group photograph. The caption listed the attendees, and Mr. Patrick Finnegan, a generous benefactor to the children's wing. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She zoomed in on the grainy image. There he was, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a sharp tuxedo. Even in the poor resolution, his face was stern, his eyes deep-set, his posture radiating an unyielding authority. He was exactly as Alara had described. "Eris," she called out, her voice tight with excitement. He came over, and she pointed to the screen. "Look." Eris stared at the face of the man who had haunted Alara's final days. He pulled out his tablet, displaying the high-resolution scan of the diary page. He read Alara's words aloud, his voice low. His eyes are cold, like chips of ice. He's not just a thug. He's someone who believes he owns the ground he walks on. The man in the photo and the man in the diary merged into one. Patrick Finnegan, the philanthropist. Patrick Finnegan, the stalker. The public mask was chillingly effective. This breakthrough galvanized them. With a face and a public persona, their search gained new focus. Eris returned to the shipping manifests for the Trident, this time armed with the knowledge of Finnegan's legitimate business. He cross-referenced the cargo. The manifest declared a large shipment of Irish linens. But when Eris checked it against the port's tonnage logs, he found a significant discrepancy. The weight of the cargo was far too high for simple textiles. He was smuggling, Eris declared, tapping the figures. Classic method, hiding something heavy, probably illicit, within a legitimate shipment. Weapons, unlicensed liquor, it was the height of prohibition. Either would be worth killing for. As Eris pieced together the crime, Lena continued her deep dive into Finnegan's public life, searching for any cracks in his respectable facade. She began cross-referencing his name with old police blotters, a tedious process of scrolling through endless rolls of microfilm. Just as her eyes began to glaze over, a name jumped out. A minor incident report from 1922, a year before Alara's disappearance. A rival merchant had filed a complaint against Patrick Finnegan for intimidation and threats. Lena's heart hammered, but the next line was a letdown. Complaint withdrawn 2 days later. It was a dead end, yet something made her pause. She read the report again, her eyes catching on a small detail she had almost missed. The name of the investigating officer, Sergeant O'Malley. It was another name, another piece of the puzzle pulled from the past. A police officer who had a direct, officially documented interaction with Finnegan regarding his criminal behavior. "Eris," Lena said, her voice steady. "I think I found something." A police sergeant named O'Malley investigated Finnegan for intimidation a year before Alara died. The complaint was dropped. Eris looked up from the shipping logs. The implications settled over them. The profile was now terrifyingly clear. Patrick Finnegan was a wealthy, powerful, and ruthless smuggler, shielded by a carefully crafted public image. And his influence might have reached into the very police force meant to stop him. The question was no longer just what happened to Alara, but how deep the conspiracy went. The fluorescent lights of the Boston City archives hummed with an indifferent, monotonous drone, a stark contrast to the charged energy between Eris and Lena. The discovery of Sergeant O'Malley's name had transformed their investigation from a historical inquiry into a cold case with living roots, its tendrils reaching into the very institution meant to protect citizens like Alara Vance. Getting access to police personnel files from the 1920s wasn't straightforward. It required a formal request, citing their academic credentials and the context of the archaeological find. 3 days of bureaucratic waiting felt like an eternity. Finally, a clerk wheeled out a cart laden with dusty, ledger-sized volumes. Police personnel records, 1920-1930, she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous reading room. "Handle with care. This stuff is older than my grandmother." Eris gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, we will." They found the volume for NS and carefully turned the brittle pages until they landed on O'Malley Thomas J. The file was thin, held together by a simple brass fastener. Lena leaned in, her phone camera ready to digitize every document. Eris read through the entries methodically, his finger tracing the lines of faded type and cursive script. "Enlisted 1912, Eris murmured, summarizing the contents. "Service record is exemplary. Multiple commendations for bravery, particularly during the Boston police strike of 1919. He stayed on the job, promoted to sergeant in 1921. By all accounts, a model officer on the rise." Lena scanned the commendation letters. "Look at this. Unwavering commitment to justice. An officer of unimpeachable integrity. These aren't just standard phrases. His superiors genuinely respected him. They continued to sift through the file, documenting his steady career. Then, they reached the year 1923, just a few months after the date on the intimidation report against Finnegan. The narrative of Thomas O'Malley's career took a jarring, inexplicable turn. "What is this?" Lena pointed to a transfer order dated February 1923. He was reassigned from the Detective Bureau in the North End, a high-profile post, to the property clerk's office at headquarters. Eris's eyes narrowed. That's a desk job, a dead end, for an officer with his record? It makes no sense. He flipped the page. Appended to the transfer was a disciplinary note. "Cited for insubordination," he read aloud, his voice laced with skepticism. The details are vague. "Failure to follow a direct order from a superior regarding an ongoing investigation." There's no case number, no supplemental report. It's a ghost citation. "A ghost citation that effectively ended his career," Lena countered, her expression grim. The intimidation report against Finnegan was in late 1922. This transfer is just a couple of months later. He must have pushed too hard, refused to drop it. Finnegan had him removed, Eris concluded, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. He didn't bribe O'Malley. He couldn't. O'Malley was an honest cop, so Finnegan had him buried in paperwork, silenced by the very system he swore to uphold. The injustice of it hung heavy in the air, a century-old wrong that felt as fresh as yesterday's news. They thought that was the end of the trail, a confirmation of corruption, but a dead end for Alara. But as Lena was photographing the last page, a standard form detailing O'Malley's quiet resignation in 1928, she noticed something. Tucked into the crease of the folder, almost lost, was a small, folded slip of carbon paper. It was a copy of a memo, so faint it was barely legible. Eris held it carefully under the desk lamp, the two of them huddled close. It was a daily assignment roster from O'Malley's last week as a detective. "Look," Eris breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He pointed to the last entry, dated just before his transfer. It was a handwritten note from O'Malley himself, an addendum to his official duties. Following up on civilian informant Tip Ray, Finnegan Imports. Unusual late-night activity at Atlantic Avenue warehouse, Pier 4. Illicit cargo suspected. Requesting surveillance warrant. Beneath it, in a different, heavier hand, was a single, dismissive word scrawled in red ink. Denied. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The Atlantic Avenue warehouse, that's the one that burned down, the one from the newspaper article. It wasn't just a clue, it was a ghost's final testimony. Sergeant O'Malley, on the verge of exposing Finnegan's operation, was shut down from within. He knew exactly where the crime was happening. He had identified the location where Alara overheard the conversation, the place Liam likely worked, and the heart of Finnegan's criminal enterprise. Finnegan didn't just have an officer silenced. He had a specific, imminent threat neutralized. And now, Eris and Lena knew exactly where to focus their attention for the final act of Alara's story. The lab was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the ventilation system. A soft, gray light filtered through the large windows, illuminating the artifacts of a life cut short, laid out on the central steel table. Alara's diary, open to its final page. The faded newspaper clipping. A glossy print of Patrick Finnegan's smug face. And the photocopied, damning pages from Sergeant O'Malley's file. It felt less like an evidence board and more like a memorial. Eris stood with his hands on his hips, his gaze sweeping over the collection. Lena leaned against a nearby counter, a mug of cold coffee forgotten in her hands. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of a century of secrets. "He silenced a cop," Eris said, his voice low, breaking the quiet. "Not with a bribe, not with a threat, but with pure influence." O'Malley got too close, identified the warehouse, and Finnegan had him buried in paperwork for the rest of his career. "It's all here." He tapped the memo denying O'Malley's warrant request. "The warehouse from the fire," Lena added, stepping closer. "The one Alara mentioned. It was the hub. She knew it, and so did O'Malley." The Trident wasn't just a ship, was it? It was the name of his whole operation, a symbol of his power over the docks. Eris nodded, his mind assembling the final, tragic pieces. Finnegan was smuggling something far more valuable than illicit liquor. The Ledger Alara saw it was his lifeline. Liam must have stumbled upon it. Maybe he saw a delivery, recognized a crate marking, or just overheard the wrong conversation. He was a dock worker. He was in the perfect position to become a threat. He picked up the diary, his gloved fingers tracing the elegant, now frantic, script of the last few entries. She writes about Liam's disappearance, the terror, the certainty that Finnegan was behind it. But look at this last line, the one that trails off. Lena leaned in to read it with him. I cannot let him be forgotten. I must find proof. The warehouse, he must have left something behind. I am going tonight. She went back, Lena whispered, the realization dawning with cold certainty. She went back to the lion's den, alone. The sterile lab seemed to fade away, replaced by the grim, gaslit reality of the Boston docks in 1923. Eris could picture it vividly. Alara, cloaked in darkness, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She would have slipped through a broken fence or a shadowed doorway into the cavernous warehouse, the air thick with the smell of burnt timber, salt, and rot. She wasn't looking for a fight. She was looking for answers, for a piece of Liam she could hold onto, for a sliver of justice she could bring to the light. And Finnegan found her. Eris continued the narrative, his voice somber. Maybe he was there overseeing a cleanup after the fire, destroying any remaining evidence. Or perhaps he returned, paranoid, to ensure his secrets were safe. He was a man who'd already made one person disappear and neutralized a police sergeant. A grieving, terrified girl searching for answers would have been nothing more than a loose end. He walked over to the light box where the X-rays of Alara's skeleton were displayed. He pointed to the skull. There's no sign of a gunshot wound, but see this? A slight fracture on the zygomatic arch and a hairline crack on a rib here. It wasn't a clean, quick event. It was a struggle. He was a powerful, intimidating man. He overpowered her. The clinical assessment did nothing to dull the horror. Finnegan, his handsome face twisted by rage, silencing Alara's pleas and accusations with brutal force. And then, the cold calculation of a man protecting his empire. The construction site, Lena said, connecting the final dots. It's the exact location of Finnegan's old warehouse district before it was all torn down and redeveloped decades later. He didn't move the body. He couldn't risk it. He buried her right there, under the floorboards or in the dirt foundation, confident she would never be found. He used the very ground of his criminal enterprise to be her tomb. He extinguished her life, and then he extinguished her story, burying it beneath a future city that would have no memory of her. The tin box, clutched to her chest, was her last act of defiance, a desperate hope that someday, someone would find it and read her truth. Eris carefully closed the diary and placed it back in its archival container. The investigation was over. There would be no trial, no modern-day justice. Finnegan had lived out his life in wealth and society, dying an old man, his secrets intact. But as Eris looked at Lena, he saw the same understanding in her eyes. This wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. They had given Alara Vance her name back. They had validated her fear, honored her love for Liam, and borne witness to her courage. They had unearthed her story from the bones and the ink, ensuring she was more than just a forgotten skeleton in the Boston clay. We'll write the final report, Eris said, and we'll make sure her remains are given a proper burial, with her name. Lena nodded, a sad, resolute smile on her face. She waited 100 years to be heard. I think she'd be happy with that.